Welcome to the Living Well Show, the show that's committed to bringing you and your family a healthier lifestyle. Today, our topic is parenting, one we as parents all struggle with. How do we discipline our children? What's the best way? I know we all struggle with that, and today we have an expert in the field of child and adolescent counseling. His name is Danny Hart. Thanks, Danny, for coming.
Glad to be here.
Danny, how long have you been counseling? You said 17 years?
17 years, and I'm still not crazy yet.
You've been in many different fields, though, right? Some with children, some with even criminals. Is that right?
Started off working with children, and worked up to adolescents and then adults, and I've done some work with the criminal population, sexual abusers, and things like that.
Wow. So it sounds like he knows what he's talking about. Danny, in your opinion, what is the most effective way to discipline your child, would you consider?
Well, it really just depends on the age of the child and whatever is specifically going on with your children. One thing could work for one child, another thing could work for another child. So I don't have any one particular way that's best for all children. It just really kind of depends on your circumstances. And when I'm meeting with a family, first thing I like to do is just kind of listen and find out what's been going on with that family to find what would be the best thing that would work for them.
Okay. What would you consider, though, the main thing that they need to remember more than anything else? Is there one thing that you can tell them that would be the most important thing?
I think the most important thing in discipline is consistency. And of course that stands to reason. I almost think that any form of discipline would work reasonably well if you were consistent with it. What happens, though, is we try something and it doesn't work as well as we'd like, and then we abandon it, and then we try something else, and then that doesn't work, and then we try something else, and we're frustrated all the time. Mm-hmm. And when we get frustrated, we get angry, and when we get angry, well, then we start to lose, and the kids are in control, and chaos and pandemonium breaks out.
So how do you feel about yelling?
Well,
because I'd be yelling about that time. I mean, I'm learning not to do that, but
I have to admit that sometimes I break down and I yell too, and just want to apologize to my children right now that yes, I sometimes yell at you, and I'm sorry. But I think we all do that when they're winning and mm-hmm. we're losing, and we're frustrated because we're just really not using proper techniques.
Okay. The consistency you talk about, what would that look like for a parent to be consistent? Would that mean once they say something to always stick with that? What do you mean exactly?
Well, I think the key to consistency is really simply this. It's not the biggest. It's not the smartest. It's not even the strongest that wins. It's the person that lasts the longest. And if we can just get the idea into our heads and stick with it, that we have more stick-to-it power than our kids do, then we will win those battles of who's in control. And when we start winning, then we start feeling good. Mm-hmm. And when they start to test us, instead of getting angry, we can just smile and sit back and relax, knowing that I can outlast you. And a lot of it is just us having that attitude that we're going to win and that they're not going to. And then it's a little bit easier to be consistent, because when it works, then it's easier to stay with it.
When you say outlast, does that mean not give in? Is that what you mean?
It means not give in. It's a normal for a child to test limits. That's what they're supposed to do. They're children. And just like it is for adults. Mm-hmm. For example, speeding.
I don't do that.
And I rarely do too. But if we were speeding and we had a little sensor in our car, and I hope they never come up with this, but if we had a little sensor in our car that would know every time that we're speeding, and it would send a little message to the courthouse, and they would mail us a ticket, by golly, we would stop speeding. because every time that we were speeding, we would consistently get a ticket, and we would give it up. But because we don't consistently get tickets every time we speed, we test the limits. And children do the same thing. They test to see what they can get away with. They're supposed to. They're children. And it's our job to not yell at them. I mean, how would you feel if a police officer pulled you over and said, "Now, how many times do I have to tell you not to speed?" Instead, they're very courteous, very polite, most of the time. And they say, "Yes, sir," and "Yes, ma'am," while they're writing out this ticket, and "Have a nice day."
Yeah, they're always very nice.
And then as a result of that, you know, we get to go down and pay the ticket and take care of things. And we learned, at least on that street, we better be more careful.
What would you say to a parent, though, that says, the only time my child really listens is when I yell at them?
Well, you know, I think the reason that we yell in the first place is because we feel like they're not listening. So we turn up the volume a little bit in hopes that they're able to get through to us. But I think the problem is when we start yelling in order to get their attention, then they don't listen to us when we're in our calm mode.
Because they know we're not serious.
Because they know that we're not going to write them a ticket. So it's kind of like a police officer just whistling at us as we drive by, you know, until those red lights go on, you know, we're not really worried about being in trouble yet. And so the same thing, when we resort to yelling in order to get our child's attention that we mean business, then we're teaching him not to listen to us when we're just in that calmer state, which wouldn't it be great if we could just sit back and say, I want you to do this, or I want you to stop doing this, and they would listen to us. Then we'd feel good as parents.
How do you do that, though? Because you say be consistent and not to give in and outlast your children. So you're being consistent and you're not giving in, but they are just refusing and refusing, or throwing a temper tantrum, or refusing to stay in timeout, and they just keep on. What changes that dynamic if they're fighting and you're waiting and you're not giving in and you're being consistent and you're not yelling yet? What makes the difference? Is it the timeouts? I mean, what's the other strategy?
Well, I brought today a strategy that works pretty well with kindergarten or pre-kindergarten up to about 6th grade. Of course, I'd like to say that this doesn't work for every child, but it works for most children. And again, it's not the method that makes a difference, it's the consistency that makes the biggest difference. Our goal in healthy discipline is to teach healthy self-discipline. So if we can teach the child to discipline and control themselves, then we've made our job a lot easier. When we're yelling at a child and when we're battling with them, then we're having to do their work. And so I've come up with a plan that I guess is really based on a proverb of train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old he will not depart from it. That comes out the best-selling book of all time, the Bible. So I think that's a good one to start off with. And I call it stair-step discipline. And the reason that I call it stair-step discipline is simply because as the child tests our authority, we work up a little bit farther to a higher form of consequence. Because a lot of times what happens is we're trying to discipline our children and they're not paying attention to us, and we begin to plead with them, we begin to bargain with them, we begin to threaten them, and they're still not paying attention to us, they're still testing limits, and we get angry and we start yelling, and then in our anger we bring out our ultimate consequence, whether it's spanking or whether it's taking away Nintendo for 6 months or whatever it is. And then later on, when we're not angry, we realize that was not a good way to handle it.
And it also kind of depends on how mad we get in that yelling that determines the discipline. It's not what they do wrong that determines the consequence or the discipline. It's how upset we are at the time and how upset they've got us.
And so if we've had a bad day at work, or we got a flat tire on the way home or something, we might discipline one way because we're already upset, and discipline another way when things are going well for us. And so the rules are unclear.
So it doesn't really teach them, is what you're saying.
Well, and we, as adults, we wouldn't want to be treated by a boss or a police officer or anyone in authority with us because they were having a good day or a bad day. Even though that happens, we don't like it, and it's not effective for us, and so we need a consistent method that is very clear to the children. Even young children can respond to it if we're consistent enough with it. And then it makes our job easier, and it makes their life easier.
You know, it's funny you made the comparison with the speeding with the policeman. I do know one thing I would never do to a policeman would be to yell at the policeman, because it's very consistent, you know, you'd go to jail or something along that line. And so we never do that.
And really, when someone is consistent in their authority and they treat us with respect, and we know what the rules are, then we tend to respond well back to them. And children respond better to a parent who has authority and is consistent with their authority, rather than one who's inconsistent and who's trying to love them into good behavior, who's trying to talk them into good behavior. So the more consistent we are, the easier it makes it for them.
So based on the stair-step discipline, when I was saying the child was throwing a temper tantrum and you're sitting there, you're not giving in, and you're waiting, so that would be step one, right? I mean, you're at the beginning then.
Well, the very first thing that we want to take away from our methodology of discipline is yelling.
Okay.
If we're going to do something with them that's going to require them to change, then let's do something that they're going to like better. And so we got to take away yelling. Now, yelling is a bad habit.
Right.
And sometimes I break down and give in to that rather than following these rules that I know work. But we all do that. Don't kick yourself for that. The very first thing that we want to do is teach them to respond to our direction. So rather than yelling in a calm voice, we want to tell them one time what we want them to do. If we tell them twice, then we're teaching them what?
To do it 2 times. That we not to respond until we've yelled twice.
That's
or said
right,
it
not
twice.
to respond to us when we tell them the first time. So we just want to tell them one time and then give them a consequence. So we tell them in a calm voice, look them in the right eye. Now, why the right eye? I don't know. I was just taught that. It works. So I look at them in the right eye. Maybe if they're left-handed, I'll look them in the left eye. I'm not sure, but look them in the right eye. And as an option, you might want to do a countdown. Like 1, wait a few seconds, 2,
This is for them to hear, where they can hear that.
and 3. Not tell them, repeat to them twice what they're going to do, just to count down. 1, 2, not 2, I mean business if you don't move it now, but just 2. And then on 3, take action. Now, if I get to 3, I'm going to take action with my children, regardless of whether they're scurrying to go do it now, because they made me get there. They tested limits, and now they get the consequence. That's an optional thing, to give them a countdown. The other thing is to go ahead and give them what I call step 1 in the, now we've gone from, you've asked them to do it, they did not respond, and so now we're moving up to the very first step of the consequence, and that's what I call a personal timeout.
A personal timeout?
A personal timeout would, or I like to give it a name. So if we're talking with little Johnny, then you're going to take a Johnny timeout. And so a Johnny timeout would be this, or a personal timeout would be this. You need to leave the room that we're in, that you've gotten in trouble in, and you need to stay gone for a few minutes. And that's your timeout. You're in control, because again, our goal is to teach self-discipline. So the child is in control because they're going to decide how long they're gone, and they're going to decide where they're going to decide where they're going. But the timeout is only over when you come back and you talk to me, the parent, and we talk about what you were doing wrong, or even your side of the story, or the child's side of the story, but not before then, because that's when the child wants to argue and plead their case.
So you're saying go to the timeout as you're told before, and then you can tell your side later.
Exactly.
And we tried this for a week. We tried this for the whole last week, and my kids love what we call it the kid timeout, and they love it. And
you mean it works?
yeah, they like the kid timeout. And sometimes I would forget and go straight to the next one. They'd go, I get to choose this one. I get to choose where and when. And I would just laugh. But they like that. They like that one.
And a lot of parents are like, well, wait, that's not going to work. They're in control. But that's what we want. We want them to be in control. It makes our job easier if we don't have to parent them so much. Now, if they refuse to take a personal timeout, or they seem to have problems in taking it, like they leave the room and then they continue doing in another room what you just told them not to do, or they give you any mouth, which oftentimes they want to explain their side of the story. Well, there's a time for that later when they come back.
Right.
But right now, you're going to have to take your time out. So when you don't take a personal timeout or a kid timeout or a Johnny timeout, then you're going to take a parent timeout. Now, a parent timeout's a little bit tougher. A parent timeout could be anywhere you want it to be. It could be at a wall, it could be at a corner, it could be in a chair, it could be sitting on the floor.
You mean the parent, where the parent wants it to be?
No, not the parent taking the time out, but
no,
yes, the kid, or sometimes we like to go to a closet, perhaps.
Right. But the parent decides this one.
The parent decides where you're going to go, because you had a chance to take care of it yourself, and so now you're going to go where I've asked you to go. And it needs to be a low stimulus environment. It needs to be looking at a wall versus looking at a TV or out a window. And it needs to be for a length of time to get their attention. And probably one of the most common things that I hear, in fact, when we were talking about this last week, I asked you, when you give timeouts, how long were you given timeouts for?
Oh, tell them that.
And
I said the age of the child, that's right.
Yeah, the age of the child. And I asked you where you heard that, and you didn't know. And everyone I ask doesn't know the answer to that. I think it's one of those psychological wives' tales. Because when I ask parents that, how effective is it, they tell me it's not effective. I think it's too short a time out. So I would suggest a minimum of 15 minutes, up to 30 minutes, depending on the age of the child. But I think timeouts that are about 5 to 10 minutes in length are more effective for children who are 2 and 3 years old.
So older than that, the timeout needs to be longer?
It needs to be longer because you've given them an opportunity to take their own timeout.
So on step 1, the kid timeout, you have to require that it be at least 5 minutes. The child has to pick anything over 5 minutes?
Well, lest you have to walk around with a watch and time it, I just say a few minutes.
Okay. But the second one is 15.
But the second one is going to be 15 to 30 minutes, and it's some time to think, and then the timeout is only over when they come back and they talk to the parent again. And this is their opportunity to debrief and to tell their side of the story. Now, what happens a lot of times is parents just say, well, you're out of timeout. But that doesn't lead to any resolution for the child. And so the child needs a chance to come and talk and get a hug and know that they're loved. And this is when you do your loving and your nurturing of your child after they've taken their time out well. And you tell them how well they've taken their time out.
You know, this seems like it puts the responsibility on the child. The child sees that it's their behavior that determines the consequence.
Exactly. And the more they feel in control, the more likely they're to do it. And the more likely that they follow along with this, the easier it becomes for you and the more you want to be consistent with this.
So in the parent timeout, what if they won't do that? So I had a client last night telling me he won't stay there, he won't stay in his chair, he won't do what he won't stay in the timeout.
Well, that's his job as a child to test limits. And, well, let me just ask you this. Typically, would you say children test limits more for moms or for dads?
Moms.
Probably moms more consistently. And I think the reason is because moms are more likely, because of their nurturing, to want to give second chances, to want to try to talk them into it. So a lot of times when a child won't take a time out, it's because they're really just testing you to see how far you'll go. And so that's where we come up with step number 3. You had a chance to take a kid timeout. You had an opportunity for an easier parent timeout. And now we're going to go to the timeout room. And the timeout room is going to not be fun. In fact, we want to make it hard enough that you would much rather take a timeout, a parent timeout, than go to the timeout room.
You know, I like the timeout room. I know you had told us at the timeout, the best place for the timeout room is the bathroom. And did you say that?
Well, I would suggest any low stimulus room. I think the problem with a bedroom is it's too easy a time for a child to take. And there is one room that every house has that makes an excellent timeout room because it has everything you need for an extended stay. It has water. It has a john. It usually doesn't have a good window to look out of. And it's kind of cold and hard time in there. And, I mean, what are you going to tell your friends later on when you're an adult? Well, my mom sent me to a timeout in the bathroom. I don't think so. You know, I could just see us telling a therapist that one day.
Now, my kids hate the bathroom. They don't like that. And they were like, I got to go in the bathroom? Why got to go in the bathroom? So it worked very well.
And that's what we want it to be. We want it to be a deterrent so that when you're working your way up, after you do that a few times, you just decide, I'll take the parent timeout. Because really what we're trying to get to is that you take the kid timeout, and you take the kid timeout because you'd rather listen to mom the first time, or we want to get you to the point where you'd rather listen to mom the first time because it's easier than spending a long time in the timeout room.
How much time do they need to stay there when it's the timeout room?
Well, I think a minimum of 1 hour. And of course it depends on the child. A 4-year-old taking a 1-hour timeout in a timeout room, or a 5-year-old is probably sufficient to get their attention. Whereas for a 9 or a 10 or 11-year-old, it might take 3 or 4 hours in there before they calm down enough to realize that you're the parent and that you're in charge and that you're going to win.
Okay. So they're in the timeout room and they're supposed to stay there, let's say 1 hour, and they take the toilet paper. Not that my kids did this, of course. They pull the toilet paper off, they make a mess of the bathroom, they scream and yell and all that.
So what that tells me is that the child wants for you to come in and give them some attention. What we don't want to do is give them the kind of attention that they're used to, which is us yelling and throwing a fit, because then they get a reward in that. And the reward is, I'm making you suffer too. And I'm going to teach you not to put me in this timeout room. I'm going to make it miserable for you.
And I think we all know what that feels like.
Yes. And so what we want to do is we want to walk in there relaxed and say, well, I see you want my attention, so every time I come in here, you're going to get a spanking. Just one, the first time.
So when you say one, you mean like one swat?
One swat. And the second time I come in, you're going to get 2 swats. And the third time I come in, you're going to get 3. And I tell my parents that are doing this, if your kids get up to 7, you probably better give me a phone call because there's something wrong with their ability to learn here.
When you say, would that be like maybe a chemical imbalance or?
Yeah, there are some children who really want to be good, but just like adults, some people have chemical imbalances, and some people try as they might, they just have difficulty controlling their anger, or controlling their temper, or controlling their attitude. And those are children that we need to help in a different way. Although this will help them and it will improve their behavior, it just may, if you have a child that's challenging you at that point, then one of two things is wrong. They don't believe that you're going to follow through with it, because your past history is that you try some new discipline method and it doesn't work the first day or two and you give up on it. And so I think consistency with any plan is vitally important. And number two, you might have a child who just can't do this even though they're trying. And those are usually the children that you can see they're trying. They just can't do it.
Well, I know that with my kids, we didn't get past, one time I had to send them to the bathroom, and after that they didn't want to go back. And this was both of them, I had to do that. We didn't ever get past, they didn't mess up the bathroom. So I would, most of the time, do they not have to go to the fourth step?
Actually, I find that most kids end up going to the bathroom once or twice before they realize, I don't want to do that. Most kids don't even have to go to that fourth step if they see that you mean business and that you've changed. And that means you have to give up your old habit of yelling. Because if you're doing the old stuff, then they're not going to think that you've really changed, and so they're not going to change too. I call that fourth step the ultimate consequence. And it can be what I call 1+1 spanking, where every time you go in, you give them another swat. And I don't think you're going to get in trouble with anybody if you're calmly going down into the bathroom after you've given them these other consequences and they've refused that, and you're giving them one spanking, and then the next time you're coming in and giving them 2 spankings. That's obviously a sign that you're in control. And the kind of spankings that are unhealthy is when you're angry and you're out of control.
Right. We don't want to hurt the child.
That's right.
And
another
another
ultimate consequence for parents who prefer not to spank, or sometimes the children are just too old that spanking really does the trick, is I like to have them write an essay. And it might be a paragraph for someone in 2nd grade. It might be 3 pages for someone in 5th grade or 6th grade. But
what's the essay about?
Well, the essay is about whatever you got in trouble for. So I asked you to turn off the TV and go to bed. You didn't take the kid time out. You were mouthy on the parent time out. You made a lot of noise, slammed the door going into the bathroom to take the bathroom time out.
So they're writing an essay about what they did wrong.
And so you're going to write an essay, and you're going to be in there until you finish the essay. Or late at night, maybe you need to come home tomorrow and go to the bathroom there at that point, and your timeout will be over when you finish writing this essay. And you're going to write and tell me why you did it and what you learned from it.
Okay.
And then I'll be willing to hear whatever you have to say. But it's amazing how short the argument becomes when they have to write it down.
I bet. Well, I appreciated learning about it. I know for our family, about 4 years ago, we started being consistent. And we found it hard to be consistent, especially for me, because I had such a habit of giving in. And so the more I learned to be consistent, the better my children started behaving. And so for us, consistency has really changed the family dynamics completely. And I feel like we're very respectful of our children, and they respect what we say so much better. And they enjoyed the system, but again, they didn't like the bathroom. And so thank you for sharing your unique system of disciplining with us and explaining it so well.
I was glad to be here.
Do you have any other books that you can suggest for other kinds of discipline or things that work well that people could go to read about?
I've read hundreds of books on parenting, and I don't think I've ever read a book that I didn't get some new idea out of. But probably my 3 favorites would be Lee Cantor's Assertive Discipline for Parents.
Mhm.
And I like that because it's a short, about 120 pages.